Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to this video. I have got some must-read book recommendations for you today. These are all the books I've ever given 5 stars to, and granted maybe like 1 or 2 4.5-star books that I still think you should read once in your life, or twice if you really like them. We have got everything in here, so I've got some classics, I've got some fantasy, I've got sci-fi, I've got some like mystery, I've got everything, so I hope there's gonna be something for everybody's taste. Obviously, just because I think these books were like 5 stars doesn't mean you're gonna think the same thing. You know that these are some of the best books I've ever read, so I wanted to share them with you. Some of these you might already have heard as like, oh, you need to read this book, but maybe you should. Alright, so the first book is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I feel like this is one of the books where almost everybody I know, or almost everyone, like kind of knows it, kind of knows the story, kind of knows about it, but not everyone has read it, and it's definitely worth it. I do think you should read it. It's the story of, well, Frankenstein's monster, obviously, I think is what most people associate obviously with Frankenstein, but Frankenstein is the doctor who makes his monster. We actually followed the monster for a long part of this book, and those are actually my favorite parts because, like, you can't, honestly, you cannot not love Frankenstein's monster. Like, he reads Paradise Lost. I've tabbed this book, and that already means, like, I really enjoyed it. Like, if something, I don't usually tab my books, but if a book is so good and there's like lines that I really am like, I need to remember this, I want to read this again, and a book convinces me to tab it, that's a 5 star. That's a 5-star read. Right, classic number 2, and I think probably my favorite book of all time is The Picture of Dorian Gray. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Again, I've tabbed it like quite a lot because it's so beautiful. This book is probably one of the most like beautifully written books I have ever read. If you don't know the story of Dorian Gray, he's like a young man who's always he's so beautiful, he's so stunning, he's such a good person and all of that. So one day he has his portrait painted, or his picture painted. We follow him throughout his life, kind of sinking into being quite a bad person, an evil person, into the cruelties that he goes down, and instead of his body, his face, his being, his portrait kind of shows all that would do to you, all that would do to your, like, obviously exterior, but also how it make you feel and all of that. And this is beautiful. This is probably my favorite book of all time, as I said. The Picture of Dorian Gray. The last classic I have for you is one I read, is like the most recent read out of all the classics for me, and it's The Phantom of the Opera, which is, again, a story that most of you probably kind of know, but have you read the book though? Have you read it? First of all, I have a beautiful edition. I have one that's like black and white on the other side. Love this edition, love this book, so gorgeous. This is the story of the opera ghost in the Paris Opera House. This takes place in the opera house. Like, most of this actually takes place in the opera house and like underneath the opera house, which is so cool. Like, all of the, just generally the scenery of it, the description of the scenery is so beautiful, really makes me want to go to Paris, I'm not gonna lie. This has music, this has love, this has some kind of detective story with it, actually. If by the end you don't like the Phantom, or you're kind of not a little bit in love with the Phantom. So mainly we follow Christine, who's like an uprising opera singer at the opera house, and she kind of enters a kind of a relationship with the opera ghost, who lots of people believe he doesn't exist, or it's like it's just pranks and it's tricks someone is playing on the opera house itself, and also on the people who run the opera house. Can I just say, if you haven't read it, you're not gonna know this, but like Raoul Did not like the guy. I cannot stand the guy. I'm sorry. The next one, I don't think would count as a classic. I have categorized this as kind of dark academia-ish, but it is like the classic dark academia. The Secret History. Yes, it's quite a long one. It doesn't look so long, but this is like a super floppy edition. I love this book, like just the edition. Great, great, love the floppiness. We love the floppiness. So The Secret History by Donna Tartt. We follow a group of uni students who all study Greek, I think, and Latin and like the old languages. They're just like a group of 6 people who always have a class with this one professor, and we follow the dynamics in the group and like what happens, and they go kind of off the rails and a bit crazy. And I have heard the criticism about the book that is like drags on quite a lot, and it could just have been 200 pages shorter and we would not have missed a lot, and I kind of agree, but I do think it's worth reading still. But if you have read it and you're looking for something that is kind of like The Secret History, so the dark academia vibes of it, but maybe not as long, or maybe just not The Secret History, I have another one for you. If We Were Villains by Emma Rio. I loved this. This is, if you've read The Secret History and you didn't think it's 100%, maybe this would make it 100%. This also follows a group of uni students, but they all study Shakespeare. So they're all in like the theater program, and they're all gonna be actors, and they put on quite a few Shakespeare plays. We follow them as they're putting on plays. Something tragic happens at the school, and we are like trying to find out what happened. Who was it? What's going on? And like all of the references to so many Shakespeare plays is great, because they obviously put some on, but we also just get some like rehearsal scenes, and it's kind of, you maybe always get cast as the villain. If you always get cast as the temptress, like does that seep into your real life? And that's just kind of the vibe that's going on in here, and it's so good. It's so good. I just recently got Emma Rio's second book, like not to this, but just like her second book ever. This was her debut novel. I got her other book, Graveyard Shift, recently. So excited. Sounds fantastic. Again, if that's not a 5-star, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, let's maybe move on to a different category. I'm gonna throw in a sci-fi right here. This is the only sci-fi I have, and this is kind of a recommendation for a series, but if you don't want to read the whole series, definitely read the first book of The 3-Body Problem. I am not gonna attempt to say this author's name, because definitely gonna butcher that, so we're not gonna try. Maybe you've seen that Netflix recently turned this into a TV series, and I've watched it already, and I think they actually did a really good job. I really enjoyed it. They kind of smushed book 1 and 2 into the first season, I think, and there might be a second one, so I'm interested in that. In the book, there's a video game where the characters are in a world with 3 suns, and they have to figure out, like, how do we, like, when does what sun come up? How does that affect the world? And we follow scientists, multiple scientists, who are playing this game, and then see what this, like, does to the real world they're in. Obviously, this doesn't stay in the game. This kind of seeps into the real world, but we're trying to figure out, what does this civilization who has 3 suns, how do they even, like, how would you live in that kind of world? And it's really, really interesting, and I thought the concept is, like, super crazy. That generally the 3-body problem, like a 3-body problem, is a common, like, that's a common problem in physics and science. This is an actual thing, and this is, like, brought into an online game, like a video game. I thought that concept was so cool, and, like, it really pulled you in, and was so insane when you read the whole thing. Like, it kind of got completely insane at the end, but kind of loved it. I loved how insane it was. Definitely 5 stars. The books get longer and longer as you go on, so I think you would be okay with just reading the first one. It's the best out of all of them, personally. I think that, but if you like it, do continue with the series, because it's fantastic. It's really fantastic. I'll throw in a quick, like, not really fitting to any other genre book, which is Daisy Jones and the Six. I guess this would count as literary fiction, by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is my first and only Taylor Jenkins Reid book I've read, and this is written in like an interview style, and I listened to it as an audiobook, and it was like a full cast audiobook. Every single person had a different voice. It was so well made and really, really cool. I do really recommend listening to an audiobook of this, actually. I honestly thought that this was gonna be super boring, because this is about a band, and it's just like following their journey of, we're going on tour, we're forming the band, we are a small band, we're just playing little clubs, at some point we're playing a tour and we're super famous, and what goes on in the band, like behind the scenes basically. And all of this is written in an interview style, as like someone who's, after everything's happened, after like years and years, talks to the members of the band and like lets them tell their story. It surprisingly like flowed very well, which is what I kind of was scared of, because it's like, if it's like question, answer, is that really like a good flowing story? I don't know, but it really was, and I found it very moving, honestly, because it was so real and so human and not boring at all. I will read more by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I was surprised. I don't even know why I haven't read anything by her before, but Daisy Jones and the Six, fantastic book. Next up, we got a good old classic vampire story. Even though it's not so super classic vampire story, this is Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. Again, I tabbed because I couldn't stop myself. This tells us the story of a vampire, the vampire. It's partly kind of an interview, actually, but then when kind of the vampire goes into telling us about his life, it kind of switches into as if those scenes were happening like right now in the present. And basically it's about two vampires, like the vampire and the vampire Lestat, adopting a vampire child. And then we just kind of see how that goes. How do you raise a vampire child? How does that even happen? If you want to find out, read this book. I'm gonna say this was better than Dracula. Even if this Dracula's like the classic vampire story, this was beautifully written. This was fantastic. This almost made me cry because it was so like beautiful. Just the language was so beautiful. So Interview with the Vampire. I know this is also a series, have not continued. The next one would be about the vampire Lestat, if I'm not mistaken. So we go into more characters that you get to know in the book. Have not continued yet. I might in the future. The last book that's more on the darker side for me, or like more of the tragic side, is The Ice Palace by Tarjei Vesaas. I'm thinking this is Norwegian. This is a very short book, so I feel like you could do it like pretty quickly. And if you want to read this, do yourself a favor and read it in like January. I feel like January is the perfect month to read this in, because that really just enhances the experience of the whole, it's cold, it's frosty, it's kind of, we're in the ice palace. This follows two girls, pretty young girls, I think they're around like 10 or 11, who meet in school, and they're living near the Norwegian fjords, and in one of those fjords there is a waterfall which is frozen during the winter months, and they call that the ice palace. So you can go through it. It's just gorgeous. The way this was described was so beautiful. Like, you really felt like you were there, or you wanted to be there. And it's quite a tragic book. I will warn you, it's quite tragic, because one of the girls goes missing. Most of like the beauty comes from the descriptions of the ice palace, of just like the surroundings, the region you live in, the relationships between the children in the school as well, because, you know, sometimes children can be quite cruel, and this is also, that plays a part in this book as well. I'm not usually a fan of overly descriptive writing, overly descriptive books. I don't need to read 5 pages describing 3 different trees. I'm looking at you, Tolkien. In here, the descriptions, I was living for them. I was living for the description, but also, it's not a super long book, so maybe that's why. Maybe that's why. if you're a fan of winter, if you're a fan of icy cold stories of ice, the feeling, this one, read this one. And I've got 3 more books, and they're fantasy / mythology, and I've got 2 that I'm gonna just like smush in here in the same category because they're both by the same author, Madeline Miller. The Song of Achilles and Cersei. I read Cersei before the Song of Achilles, even though now the Song of Achilles is like much more popular, and like for a good reason. I do think I prefer this over this, but I gave both of these 5 stars. Start with Cersei. Cersei is the witch that lives on an island, and you may know her as like one of the stops that Odysseus makes on his journey back home to Ithaca. So she also appears in the Odyssey. I haven't read the Odyssey, but I know like of her. I knew her as a character kind of. And we follow her life on this island, and we follow her having to deal with sailors coming to her island all the time, and she's like a woman living alone, so sailors are gonna want to take advantage of her because that's the time we're living in. And she's a witch, so she can deal with that though. She's crafty, she's strong, and she's really cool. I love her. I feel like in the Odyssey, obviously she comes, like her character comes across as like the evil witch that turned Odysseus' men into pigs. I think it's pigs in this book. I'm not sure if it's pigs in the Odyssey. Don't count on me with that information. We get a more like human approach to Cersei in this book, and I really loved it. I loved it. I will say, trigger warning for sexual assault, abuse, because there is a scene, quite a graphic scene in here that I did not enjoy reading. I kind of skipped over it a little bit, just so you know, it's in here. You can skip it though. But yeah. And then obviously the Song of Achilles. In here we follow Achilles and Patroclus, who grow up together as best friends and maybe more. Obviously Achilles, quite the popular like character from the Trojan War story. You may know that, you may know him from that even if you haven't read this book. Patroclus used to like, I think in other stories he's just like his companion and his like friend who's there always. In this book obviously we have the more romantic approach to their story. We get to see how they grow up. That's the only part I feel like it was kind of drawn out a little bit of the when do we get to the war, but it was still beautiful. Like that does not take anything away from the story. And I tabbed so many quotes that I just found so gorgeous. This is Madeline Miller at her finest. Generally, if you're like into mythology or mythology retellings, you may have read these 2. Still, I think they're gorgeous. 5-star books, both of them. We are at the last book of today, which is very randomly A Court of Mist and Fury, which is the 2nd book in the ACOTAR series. I didn't give the first one, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I did not give that book 5 stars. This one gets 5 stars though. This one gets 5 stars. I started reading the ACOTAR series this year in March, I think. I've read Court of Mist and Fury, which is the 2nd book, and I've also read the 3rd one, A Court of Wings and Ruin. This 2nd book though is where it kind of really got me. I really enjoyed the first one, but I felt like it took a little while to really get going, and it took a little while to really like reel me in and make me want to continue. This one, it's a big book. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I have probably not read a book this big so fast ever. It's kind of difficult to talk about now because obviously if you haven't read the first one, don't really want to tell you anything about the 2nd one because that's gonna basically spoil anything. But maybe the first one, our main character is Farah Archeron, I think is her last name, and she accidentally, because she's hunting for food for her family because they're very poor, she accidentally kills a wolf in the woods who happens to turn out to be Fae. And because of that, she gets whisked into the Fae world, into the Spring Court. And in the first book, we get to also know Tamlin, who in the first book, I love that guy. I'm a bit embarrassed for myself there. In this book, this is also where all the book crushes on Rysand, Cassian, Azrael come from? Say Rhysand or Rysand is my question. Because I say Rysand, or in my head it's Rysand. I know lots of people say Rhysand. I don't know why. For me it's Rysand. I don't know. This book made me fall in love with Rysand and also Azrael. For me it's Azrael. I'm gonna say it's Azrael. We basically, I'm guessing throughout the whole series, follow Feyre in the Fey world, kind of monitoring her life now that she has to be in the Fey world, because in the first book she's told that because of the treaty that Fays have kind of years ago Fae have made with humans, because she killed one, a Fae, she now has to stay there. So in this second book, her story continues in the Fey world, more prominently in the Night Court. We love Rysand. We hate Tamlin, especially after book 2. If you didn't hate him after book 1, you're gonna hate him after book 2. Believe me. Okay, thank you so much for sticking around if you've stuck around until the end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're doing good. I hope you have a good morning, good day, good night, good evening, wherever you are in the world. By the way, I have a list of all my 5-star books. I'm on Fable, and the list is like public on Fable. I'm gonna link my Fable in the description box, because I finally said goodbye to my Goodreads. I've said goodbye to Goodreads. I have deleted the app from my phone. I'm only on Fable now, and it's just so much better. If you're still on Goodreads and you don't know Fable, check it out, because it's just better. I'll link my Fable down in the description box, so you can like look through this list yourself if you want, and maybe read other people's reviews. I also post reviews of the books I read over there, so go check that out if you want. I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you again for watching, and yeah, bye bye.